So most welcome, everyone. It is 6 o'clock. My name is Martin Karlsson Wall, and I am the director for the Center for Sports and Business here at the Stockholm School of Economics. And what you have in front of you is our auditorium. So this is the main part of SSE. This is our home ground. And the reason why we thought we would start with this is to showcase to the people in Paris and in all over Germany a little bit from each school, and we do this together. And right now, actually, it's a very special time of the year because it's the Nobel festivities. And actually in our auditorium, that's where we have the Nobel lecture. So I guess what we do tonight is equally interesting, hopefully for you. But we thought we would share something from SSE. Sasha, please.
Yes, also a very warm welcome from our side, from my side. So I'm the guy on the right-hand side, Sascha Schmidt. I'm heading the center and the chair for sports and management at WHU, Otto Beisheim School of Management in Germany. And yeah, so it's indeed the first time that we organized this webinar. And so it's a kind of a pioneering event. And we are really, really happy that you want to spend time with us. And the question is, how did the three schools together? And yeah, so we sit together and figured out there are some interesting commonalities and differences between the three of us. Commonalities, yes. So we all have a dedicated center for sports and business or sports and management. All schools are quite ambitious in terms of also ranking positions, etc. And the three of us, we have an alumni body that is obviously interested in sports. Yes, and then I also share a commonality with Martin, my Swedish friend here, because we share the destiny of a very disappointing football World Cup.
Yeah.
So Sweden didn't even manage to get to the World Cup finals. So I guess you lost against Poland.
Yeah.
So Lewandowski was going to Qatar while Ibrahimovic didn't. Yes, and you all realize that also Germany is not very happy not reaching the round of 16 for the third time in a row for a big tournament. So yeah, so these are kind of painful commonalities between the two of us, but a difference to Caroline representing France here. So we could be a little jealous here. So if you look at your track record at the World Cup, so we might see France as the old and the new World Cup champion. Yes, and then of course I think we all do some interesting stuff in various research fields, and that's why we thought, okay, why don't we share that also with a broader alumni audience? And this is how the idea of today's webinar came up. And this is the kind of today's format. So if you could switch.
Yeah.
Please. So very easy, 3 points. So we are in the middle of a little introduction. So we will tell you a little bit more on what we are actually doing at our research centers. Then we have, and that's the kind of the main part of the webinar, Martin to talk about global sports when dreams and dark sides collide. This is followed by a Q&A session. And at the end, we will talk a little bit about the idea of the next steps. Okay, yes. So let me start with introducing WHU, especially to ESSEC and SSE alumni. So we are almost 40 years old. A rather small business school with about 2,000 students, and but also within the kind of often cited as the leading business school in Germany. So at that school, we run the Center for Sports and Management since 2014. And so here we decided not to run our own MBA, bachelor, or master program dedicated to sports, but we are teaching courses across all programs. and put our focus on executive education. So this is why we founded the Sports Business Academy. And so we had around or a little more than 500 people running through the academy since our foundation. Yeah, so what are we doing topic-wise? Future of sports. So that is the main theme we are following. And we are especially looking at how new technology is impacting the future of sports in terms of the athletes, sports consumers and fans, but also the management of sports. And doing so, we want to contribute to future readiness of players in the sports industry. We also look at corporate diversification strategies, because kind of corporate strategy is my background. And also a colleague of mine, Dominik Schreier, is looking at stadium economics. So these are kind of the themes we are looking at. We try to work quite international. So we just launched an online course together with MIT. And this is looking at transformational technologies, applied lessons from sports. So there we use sports, in fact, to explain technologies and their impact on athletes, fans, and management. What else? Yeah, so with Martin, with the SSE, so we have a joint program that's an EU-funded program where we were designing together with the Zagreb School of Management an online program especially for Olympic athletes that were looking at entrepreneurship opportunities during or after their career, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, so that's a kind of what we are doing. And if we look at what kind of sports are key, so football is by far kind of the commercially biggest sector we are looking at, but we also did research and also projects in winter sports, basketball, esports, and motor racing. Yeah, so that's about us. So let me hand over to Caroline.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sasha. What a great occasion, having our 3 schools, 3 centers, and 3 alumni communities together here for the first time. Definitely not the last time. A bit of introduction of ESSEC to our Swedish and German colleagues. So ESSEC has been founded in 1907 with a strong background in humanist values and a strong pioneering entrepreneurial spirit, which when you come to visit the school, you can feel in everything we do, you can feel that in our students. And today we're top 10 European business school, and many of our programs are internationally ranked. A master's in management, for example, is ranked 6 globally. We have campuses not only in France, with the main campus being just outside of Paris in Cergy. We also have a campus in the Paris Business District in La Défense, and we have campuses in Singapore and Morocco. And we've recently, very proud of that, been nominated as the most engaged business school in environmental and social issues in France. So it's something that we sort of pride ourselves in and have a strong background in. Before it was cool, might I add, we've been doing this for a long time. And so the ESSEC Sports Chair has been founded in 2020, much like at the WHU. We don't do specialized programs, but we have offered this as a specialization to our students in the general management programs, in the global BBA, in the Masters in Management, and in a number of the specialized Masters programs. ESSEC has a really long history in sports business because it used to have a chair in international sports marketing between 2001 and 2015. And thanks to that, we really have a really strong alumni community. We now have alumni who are leaders in different places in the global sports ecosystem. We really count on their support. So we have a long tradition in that. We work very closely with a number of partners who represent really the global sports ecosystem. So we work with Allianz and EDF, representing major sponsors in sports, and with Paris Saint-Germain, who you may have heard of, with Stade Français Paris, this is a top 16 French rugby club, with the French Federation of Basketball, and with the French National Institute for Sports Expertise and Performance, which is essentially where France trains its Olympic and Paralympic athletes, and also with with Sport dans la Ville, which is an NGO and association specializing on inclusion through sports, so bringing sports facilities to disadvantaged communities in France. Research-wise, we do a lot of applied research with our partners, so our students do not only consume knowledge in our courses, but also actively work on the case studies, on bringing applied knowledge into the sports ecosystem. We also work on career transitions in professional sports and on leadership lessons learned from sports, as my personal background is in management. You can see how we bring that into our centers. And ESSEC has also recently been putting a lot of effort in what we currently call the Sports Hub, the idea being that we're going to facilitate access for athletes, current and retiring athletes, to ESSEC courses, and we will have a single access point for that. So it's an important part of our strategy around sports.
Thank you, Caroline. And then finally, the Stockholm School of Economics. And as you can see here, many of the things are very similar. That's actually why I think this is a great combo. So my background before I started in sports and in parallel is accounting and finance. So while Caroline is in management and Sasha is in strategy, accounting and finance is my key part. So I'm head of the master program in accounting, valuation, and financial management. And very similar to ESSEC and WHU, we don't have a program, and I don't envision that we will have. It's more, the key thing is sports as a fascinating industry. How can we learn from sports and really draw attention to what other organizations outside of sports can do? So a little bit starting with the school, I think similar to ESSEC, we were founded a little bit more than 100 years ago. We're one of very few private business schools in the Nordic region. Similar to WHU, small, only 2,000 students. And yeah, in terms of internationalization has always been a key part. So SSE is part of one network which is called SEMS. Now it's only called SEMS, but for those of you who are new to this, it used to be called Community of European Management Schools. So that was the sort of the Champions League in Europe. A more recent network is the Global Network for Advanced Management. And then we have Civica, which is for political science. And ranking wise, SSE has been ranked as the best business school in the Nordic region now for 20 years in a row. So we've been fortunate there. If we move in a little bit and look at what we've done at the Center for Sports and Business. So similar to WHU, we have like 6-7 years since we started. And I will talk a little bit about this, you could say almost changing landscape, where with a little bit more of a business lingo, disruptors like SSE or ESSEC and WHU has sort of come in recent years. Because as you're all aware of, the global sports sector is a multi-billion sector. And as a consequence, it becomes relevant for business schools such as the three of us to work there. Also similar to what we've been heard before, the connection to practice is very important. So the large sports in Sweden are strategic partners, the Center for Sports and Business, and very similar to what we heard from Germany and France, that helps us both in accessing great research topics, but also disseminating and ensuring that we sort of become a thought leader in this topic. I think a central research theme that I will also address a little bit today is what's called hybrid organizations. So hybrid organizations is a little bit of a new concept. When I started SSE as a student 20 years back, then everything was about the sectors. You had the private sector, the public sector, and the non-for-profit sector. And everything was about, understand which sector you're addressing, and then you have a specific way of doing things. But if you take sports clubs, or if you take social enterprises, or if you take family business or state-owned enterprises, they're actually relying on two sectors. So state-owned enterprise is both the public sector and the private sector. And that creates unique management challenges because the interest of conflict are extremely high here. So how do you manage hybrid organizations, and how can we use sport organizations to really navigate and learn the combination of profit, passion, and politics? That's what we do. Also similar, finally, as we've been talking, we do a lot of executive education. So both for Swedish ice hockey and Swedish football and Swedish trot racing, we educate the club presidents, CEOs, and all their teams in terms of helping them professionalize their sports, because that, I think, is a joint denominator across our 3 countries, that sports is now, due to the globality, really trying to increase the knowledge and the professionalization. Sasha.
Okay, so that's not a big job here. Well, what I want to do is to kind of announce the keynote, that you have a proper intro. But we thought it would be good if we really focus on one topic for the webinar and do that in more depth, instead of all the 3 of us kind of presenting a discrete topic. So yeah, Martin, why don't you just like go ahead and jump into it?
Perfect. So I want to start with this. And I think similar things as what you see here has been said. Amongst all unimportant subjects, football is by far the most important. Sometimes in my course, see some of my students here, I say sport, of all the unimportant things in life, sport is the most important. And I think that is a good starting point to really understand why is it that we're so fascinated about things like the Olympics or the World Cup in Qatar, or, you know, in a world that is constantly competing for attentions, and really, you know, how do you become relevant? Sport is actually one of the few things in society today where, regardless of where you come from, your background, we can all join in and have a view. And as I've also been discussing in my courses and lectures, imagine the thing that if it disappears from your life, will it be valuable or not? And for many fans, if their favorite football club would go away, a lot of things in life would really go away. And I think if you just compare, you know, if Mercedes or, I don't know, Renault or something, even Volvo would go away, you know, it wouldn't really, you know, change my life so much. But, you know, I'm a big Liverpool fan. If Liverpool would go away, I mean, I haven't a tattoo on Liverpool, but the same thing is, you know, this is one of the most important things of all the unimportant things. And this is also the reason. Here we have one of the guest lecturers in our digital course, Dan Singer. So Dan Singer, being the head of McKinsey's global sports and entertainment practice, he works with many of the big leagues around the world. And as you can see here, since 2014 and onwards, a little bit when Sasha's center and our center, and then you could say that, Caroline, your center was already created. It's been sort of recreated now. You were around here. This is a sector that is really, really big. Right now, because of the immaturity of the sector, it's a little bit tricky to say exactly how big it is, but numbers normally vary from between $500 to $700 billion per year. And obviously, you know, Sweden being a small country, but the GDP of Sweden is around $550 billion per year. So this is you know, that's what I say to people in Sweden. The global sports market is the GDP of all of Sweden, and it's growing. It's growing between 4 or 5%. And it's also, if you think of it, this is the direct things. When I talk and teach about sport, I talk about the 3 sort of layers of sport. So this is a business that is 500 billion annual business that is growing quite a bit, but that is only the direct revenues. If you take all the revenues and all the businesses that is created through sports, you have a lot more. And if you also have this thing, as we started with, that sport is the most important thing about all the unimportant things. If you also put in healthcare, then we're really starting to realize this is something that we should do much more research on. Here we have another thing that sort of sets the scene for both the dark sides and the bright sides of sports. So this is David Delia. He is now head of Altman Solon. He used to be the head of sports at PwC. And this is a graph he gave me the other day, really showing that if we look at ad spend, digitalization is really, really growing. And I think this is going to be huge mega trend. I mean, we see it in many, many industries, but it's going to be a huge trend in terms of what's going to happen to the world of sports. Because, you know, if we think about sports, historically, it's all been about the physical experience. And then through TV, it became a little bit digital, and we've seen with Premier League. And now the digital is truly exploding. And we now see with obviously esports growing, we see with metaverse, and we see with different things. So in a sense, you could say that sport, regardless if you're interested or not, is a phenomena which you should sort of try to get hold of, because it says a lot about the society that we live in. And how is it that leagues work with sports? Here's an example from La Liga, also a recent lecture. And Juan Fuentes Fernandez, who heads up La Liga here in the Nordic region, I think he summarized it beautifully with from the ice cream to bread fan strategy. How are La Liga really expanding globally? It's as simple as this picture. And let me explain why. So Juan said that, you know, historically in Spain, and it's the same in Sweden, and I would assume it's the same in France and Germany also. Parents give their kids ice cream in the weekend. And this is how football historically has been consumed. You have a game in the weekend. When I grew up, I was watching the Premier League, and that was Saturdays. That was the big day. Now with TV, we see that the consumption pattern has changed. So we have games almost every day. He said that in Spain, kids eat bread 3 times per day. So instead of just interacting with La Liga 1 or twice per week, he wants through digital means that all the fans and all the consumers of La Liga should interact 24/7 all the time. And I thought you could say it in different ways, but I thought it was really nice. This is the from ice cream to bread strategy. You know, increase how you interact with the brand, and think really interesting things will come up from that. And here we see the mega trend of digitalization. And I think, you know, as you can see here, this is not something new for La Liga or, you know, Bundesliga or you know, Premier League, all the big footballs, and not at all in the US. They have been doing this for a number of years. But what we're not now seeing, and I think this is for La Liga a positive thing, but for the world of sports, I think it's a dark side. It's a winner takes it all market. So what happens now with all the financing and everything that's going on is that, very similar to what we see in other industries, there is economies of scale. So those who can afford investments in the underlying technology, digitalization being one of the biggest ones, they will not only drive past all the smaller sports, they will actually control them. Because what you see here in the launch of La Liga Tech is that the La Liga will actually outsource and sell their technology. And I think I say that with you know, humbleness, because I think La Liga has really seen the power of ecosystems. So when I work with Juan, he is very generous, and I'm sure many of his colleagues are also, because they have seen the power of, if you create the right ecosystem, you become the biggest in the world. So the way for La Liga to beat Premier League is actually not head-on competition. It's very much about creating the right collaborations. And this idea around how can we think about our partners and through that develop the ecosystem, and that is actually, from an egotistical standpoint, something fantastic. That's what we see in other industries as well. And that's why I think sports is such a beautiful thing, because what we learn in sports through open innovation, in this case with La Liga, can be applied to many other industries. Very interesting picture here. I think very few of us had imagined this and thought about this. But the two, actually, it's nowadays the 3 games with the highest attendance is actually women's football games in Europe. So 2 with Barcelona, the record one here on the left is against Real Madrid. And then you have the final between Germany and England in the Euro Cup. And I think this is also, if digitalization is one of the trends sort of, you know, spearheading that growth that Dan Singer from McKinsey highlighted, the other sort of very interesting trend is what we see in terms of equality and women's sports. And we see that in various ways right now. We at SSE are doing one research project, PhD project, where we're following one of the Stockholm club, how they, you know, try to become what's called a one club, a club where you don't talk about male football or women's football, or historically, I should say, football and then women's football. Like women's football wouldn't be, you know, equally good. You just want to talk about football. And this idea, I think we see now in many football clubs all over the world. And I think both from a practical point of view, but also from a research point of view, this mega trend of equality obviously is something that we see in other industries as well. And how can you, both from a, you could say, ethical, moral perspective, talk about this, and how can you then, you know, monetize it? These are very interesting things. Some of you might have heard or seen this really interesting project with Angel City FC. That is really now trying to take, you know, women's football in the US to the next level, where you have a lot of stars. And I think that is another really interesting, almost sub-trend, that stars actually try to align themselves with interesting brands in this space for mutual benefits. So here to the left, Natalie Portman, but you have many sort of, you know, influential sports stars in the US being co-investors in Angel City and really trying to become the example for how should you run a club. Because if you think about it, many of the dark sides of sport is violence. You don't really see that in the stands of women's football. If you just imagine, I think it was just a few months ago, the transfer record for a female, I think is around 500,000 or 600,000 euros. That was England's team captain going to FC Barcelona. And if you think about that from a sort of a male perspective, and then you think about full stands, then you start realizing the business case for women's sport is phenomenal and really, really interesting, and something we should think about. So how do we then make sense of this world? Well, one perspective that we have, and I've talked about, is what I call the PPP model: profit, passion, and politics. And it really comes from the fact that if you want to understand the global sports, you need to understand that there are 3 different systems, and within each system, you need to navigate in the right way. If we start with the American model, it focuses on profit. And here sport is a business and fans are sport consumers. And to give you an example, I was watching the rivalry between Oakland Athletics and San Francisco Giants. It was a record game in terms of audience, spectators, over 50,000 in Oakland. Interestingly, Dave Cavett, the CEO of Oakland Athletics, he showed me, he was so proud that if you came with your San Francisco Giants baseball cap and threw it in a bin, he would give you an Oakland Athletic type of hat. And he was super happy with this. He was like, this is really, you know, fun and people love it. And I was thinking, you know, with a European perspective, if you would do that, people would, you know, kill you. So it's really about that, the identity connection that you have in the US to professional sports is like any type of consumption. Maybe in college sports, people would say, no. If you're Ohio State and you're playing against Michigan, you can't do that. There you have a lot more emotions. But in North America, sports is business. You can talk about monetizing fans in a way that you can never do elsewhere. The European model, they obviously talk about profit and they talk about politics also. But the starting point is that it focuses on passion. And even if some of the clubs in Premier League and you know, in other leagues are owned by an investor, it's very much coming from the passion side. And here, what I label it, sport is an identity project. This is not something you sell a thing to. You have a tattoo with your favorite club because it's so much more than just the consumption. And I think that is part of the beauty of sports and why both it's more difficult to navigate and as compared to a normal industry, but also why, you know, sort of customers or fans are much more loyal. And here the supporters are almost like seen as family members. Finally, if we go to the Chinese model, here we have table tennis. For those of you, I'm sure there's some in the audience who've been to China and more knowledgeable in China than I am. But the key thing is you need to work with the government. You need to work with the state. Everything in China is related to the state. So sport here is about national pride. I mean, you could say it's in European countries and in US, North America also, but here it's in a very specific way. And here citizens contribute to the state. And it's very much about understanding this logic. So the key thing with this PPP framework is that it helps us to talk about why is it that certain events are run in the way it does. So if we take the Qatar World Cup now, obviously it starts from politics. And you could say they're very good in profit, but they have a challenge in terms of the passion. And that's what we've been seeing. And that has been the narrative from a European, maybe North American perspective. But for those of us I've talked to that has been in Qatar, they talk about, you know, the importance of profit and politics and how well organized the Qatar World Championship has been. So I think this really helps us to understand what is going on in different world events. Furthermore, except for the balance and combination of passion, politics, and profit, we in sports can link it to different levels of analysis. So here I've put the organizational level of analysis to highlight the idea of the Super League. So if we think a little bit about the Super League and how can we analytically think about what was going on there, many of the clubs, if we think about, you know, me coming from an accounting perspective, they did not balance the revenues and costs very well. So you have superpowers like Manchester City and others who, you know, can go to their owners and get more money. And as a consequence, they can hire a squad that cost more. But the underlying problem is, from my perspective, financial. So they need to increase the revenues and they need to also increase the predictability of those revenues. And that's why we have the Super League here. Unfortunately, for those who are interested in the Super League and the idea, which historically has been those with the worst financial performance, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus, fans were protesting. So they were saying, you know, don't treat our clubs as a business. This is not North America. This is an identity project where you see here, our club, our game, thanks, but no Yanks. So this clear idea of what we see now with quite a lot of American investors now owning clubs in Europe. What they need to understand is how embedded European football is in the sector and in the larger society. And that, I think, is one of the core issues that we see here. If we go to the individual level, as Sasha said, Sasha and I have a project on dual careers, how to help individuals when their career is done. And one of Caroline's, you know, absolute favorite topics is about dual careers. Here it's about stardom and really saying that profit, passion, and politics can be applied to the individual level. And one of the key issues here is, and one of the problems is that when you become a star, on the one hand, it's much more profitable. Just the other day, Cristiano Ronaldo had over 500 million viewers in social media. In less than a week, he has gone from 500 to 510 million. There's no wonder why he will get, you know, Saudi Arabian clubs to try to hire him, despite him not making the team in Portugal, because he is an asset now that is not a football player. He is an ambassador of much more. And you really see this idea of politics, profit, and passion being sort of combined. But we also see here that the dark sides. Paul Gascoigne, you know, being on a society level, one of the heroes of English football. You know, when he gets problems with combining profit and passion, maybe we should call it on an individual level, that is something that is, you know, impactful for himself, for his older teammates, for Tottenham as a club, for England as a nation. And we also see with stars and how we treat stars, that we see this phenomena of mental illness. Naomi Osaka, Michael Phelps, Simone Biles are three examples of when profit, passion, and politics are not really aligned, and when it creates problems. And I think when we start talking about sports as a big business, we really need to understand that the continuation of that is that some individuals will make a lot of money, but the accountability on those and the pressure and the scrutiny of those individuals will also be very high. And I think in order for global sports to be relevant and be seen as a legitimate sector, these are challenges that needs to be addressed much more than before. And here you have another, I think, great example, which is Caster Semenya. So she's not done anything wrong. But here, I think it's also a very interesting case around the tension on the one hand, everyone should be included in sports. On the other hand, equally important, everyone should have the ability to win. And Caster Semenya winning everything, that has been the key problem. Which principle is going to win here? The principle of everyone should be able to win, or the principle that everyone should be allowed to compete? And I think these issues, you know, are existential issues that helps us to understand also other things in society. And that's why I think they're really interesting. If we move up to the society level, the war in Ukraine, or the special operations, maybe if you would be in Russia, that is an issue of what happens when you combine the societal level with the individual level. If you take the Sports Illustrated idea here and you say, okay, Alexander Ovechkin, one of the greatest ice hockey players of all times, played for Washington Capitals, been the captain, has won a Stanley Cup gold. He used to be a big fan of Putin. Should he be allowed to play in the NHL or not? And I think this obviously is a question on profit, passion, and politics for Alexander Ovechkin. It's definitely an issue for the Washington Capitals. It's for NHL, and it goes up to the society level. And to me, this last point really also makes it fascinating that the 3 Ps can be linked to all these levels, because it's multi-level analysis. It's one phenomena within sports that is super, super interesting and that we want to do research on. Finally, having talked a little bit on the dark side of sports, I want to end with a very positive case. And this is the ocean race. It used to be called Whitbread Round the World Race. After that, the Volvo Ocean Race, because Volvo was the owner of the registration. Now it's called only the Ocean Race. And they have changed the business model from being a vehicle to sell Volvo trucks, Volvo cars, to saving the ocean. And here, what we have in this case, I think, is potentially also the next level of what we will see sport organization. Because this is, on the one hand, a global sailing competition done every 4th year with a rich history. On the other hand, they have increased their revenues quite considerably among cities and among donations from philanthropists, because they're doing something beyond sport. So they're purpose driven. And I think when we discussed this in the course I'm running right now, the master course here, we said, is it really a 3P model? Or is it a 4P model? Because isn't it really that those who has a clear purpose, regardless if it's, in North America, where the purpose is to make money, and then you align the profit, passion, and politics. Here it's very much about the purpose is to save the ocean. And because of that, you get access to resources that could be money from, a wealthy billionaire like Bill Gates, Melinda Gates, but it could also be the UN system because you're doing something. Or it can be that the boats, as you see here, they are super complex and really part of doing research because the boats sail in waters that no other one would sail in. And the storytelling that really comes from this, where a sailing race goes beyond sailing and becomes a way of sailing the ocean. It has a purpose. I think, to me, that's the most beauty there is in this, a highly financialized and you could say dark sports world in some cases. And I really look forward to seeing more ideas like this, where we take this idea of, as I started with, sports is the most important thing of all the unimportant things. Here, with a purpose-driven organization, it becomes sport is the most important thing that contributes to the most important things. And I think I'll end with that saying, because I think, if you're interested in sports, if you're interested in creating business ventures and others, I think this is the key. So thank you for me, and I'm looking forward to the questions. And with that, Caroline, I will hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin, for the fascinating keynote. We're open to questions now. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. I'm going to start us off. So Martin, one of the things I always really like about your work is your ability to kind of make these competing logics that we see in sports tangible. I think that's really one strong point I see across so many of your papers also. Yeah. So I'm wondering then, where does your 3P model leave us, right? So you already brought this example of maybe increased private equity investment, maybe from US investors in European sports. So what's then the conclusion for actors in the sports ecosystem based on the 3P model?
I think one conclusion is to understand where is the starting point. So if we take European sports, for example, if you don't understand that, this is not a business, this is so much more than a business. It's an identity project. For example, the importance of rhetoric and language. Here in Sweden, I think it's the same in France, definitely in Bundesliga. If you, as the new commercial director of a football club, talk about the fans, or even worse, the customers, you can quit on the day. Even though everyone would understand what you mean, the respect that you need to tell the supporters is, you are not buying anything from me. The logic that goes on here is so much more. It's a non-for-profit family logic. We don't have transactional relations with each other. We have a lifelong relationship where we will support each other for good or for bad times. And if you sort of see that as something financial, then you're not suited. Equally important, I would say, if you are an American private equity and you come to China, if you start talking about where should we expand, you build, different stores, and you don't understand that you need to build relationship with governmental officials on all levels, local, regional, national. The entire investment can go down the drains very, very quickly. So to me, the message is very much about, this is a world that I call it emotional assets. It's not a factory. It's not a house. These are assets which are highly emotional. And the advantage of that is that the consumers or those who buys our products, they are not gonna, you know, disband the brand if something else happens, if something better comes along. You're gonna be loyal for almost life. But because of that lifelong, you need to respect and talk and work in a different way. And I think when I talk with American private equity investors, that's the biggest lesson they need to learn. Biggest lesson they need to learn. All right, we have a question here. How you see the position of the International Olympic Committee, FIFA, in terms of what they're trying to achieve and how this resonates with the fans and in fact the entire population. Let's start with FIFA and Qatar. And just before we did this, I had actually a 2-hour lecture with Ricardo Fort, who used to be the head of global sponsorship for Coca-Cola. So he had been in Qatar for 2 weeks. And he said, what was really interesting right now is that there are two narratives that occurs in Qatar. The European and North American narrative is about FIFA doing things wrong, and Qatar and everyone, you know, we would say, focus too much on profit in politics. On the other hand, Ricardo said, if you talk with people from Asia, Middle East, Africa, South America, they talk about the beauty of the games. That unless now when we have the games in next time in Canada, America, and Mexico on 16 different places, everything is in one place. The organization is fantastic. And I think it's really interesting and important that the IOC and FIFA, and I think maybe we in the Western world should understand that there is important to let everyone voice what they feel and what they want. But we should also know that FIFA, with the 211 members, they have voted. And there's a lot of members that does not think like Europe. So if you twist it around, I would say that from a power dynamics, I think countries in Africa, the Middle East, Latin and South America, they're just saying, now we're taking over. You are just, and I think we see a little bit the same conversation going on in golf with LIV Golf, the new golf tour, where some people say that if you look at the sponsors of PGA and the European Golf Tour, they have been, you know, Emirates and all those, you know, companies for a very long time. It's just that what happens now is the loss of power, and you could say a shift in power. And if you then disagree with that, that's fine. But I think it's very interesting dynamics. So thank you, Henning. Great question.
Martin, just to add in perspective, so I think that so we always have the European perspective also on global sports, and but what you brought the example of the Super League, and so obviously in Europe in football we have an issue with like skyrocketing transfer fees and kind of money that is going to players and player agents, and but I don't know if you share that, but I see more openness also towards other systems. And for instance, salary cap or draft system. These are now questions that are really are debated. So because you can't fix the problems on the revenue side, because this is like a rat race that is an ongoing rat race. You can only control it on the cost side. And so at least I see more openness also to very complex problems in Europe, but maybe that's just the start of a development.
No, I think that's a very relevant and great question. If you compare Premier League with Bundesliga, and then on the lower level, unfortunately, if you compare Denmark, which is a little bit more commercial, with Sweden, where you have the 51% league, like in Bundesliga, it's very clear that the leagues that does not have commercial owners are lagging behind. So they have passion, but I actually call that in a lecture the curse of passion, because the curse of passion that is now ongoing in Bundesliga and in Sweden is that you have the authenticity. It's really something unique and something that should be, you know, valued. But on the other hand, there is a financial reality. And I think from my perspective, I think the important thing is that we debate things. Where you end up, I think it's going to be very difficult to change. You know, if you look at movies from Bundesliga or for the Swedish league, it's all about the passion. That's the only thing. The whole idea is about the passion. I, from a Swedish perspective, do think it's very interesting that when Bayern Munich becomes not a buying club, but a selling club, what does that do for the German Bundesliga and the identity of the Bundesliga? Will German fans accept to be a selling league rather than a buying league? Will they accept not to win Champions League on a regular basis? We will see. I like the membership model and I'm raised with it and I've seen the benefits. But these are very interesting questions. Very interesting questions. Caroline, did you have anything to add or?
Yes, and well, I agree that some definitely position the idea of closed leagues as a solution to some of the problems we obviously have in these European leagues we're all very passionate about. Yeah, another question I would have was around women's sports. Yeah. Very much share your hope that eventually we'll just talk about sports and move to onto a more gender neutral way of talking about sports. But as you rightly said, surely lots of opportunities for brands at the moment. We've seen it with the Euros, we've seen it with women's rugby, we've seen it with Tour de France Femmes. If I may plug our own article about to come up next week, I'd have just written a short article on women's sports and changes we see there. So what is your sense of opportunities for brands, and might it be time to strike now while the iron is hot? Are brands going to have a first mover advantage, or is this something that you see continuing in the future?
Great question. I think, first of all, I think there is definitely a first mover advantage. I think the key problem with the first mover advantage, even that would be my strategy, is that what we see is that with women's sport, there's a lot going for it, but on the sort of the boring Tuesday night events, we don't see a big crowd. So what we see in Sweden, what we see in other countries is that those first mover sponsors, they are super happy when you have larger events and larger tournaments, but then they actually feel that, okay, so where are our friends? We need to build this together. So I think the key thing, we've had a couple of really interesting cases here in the Nordics. Åbos, sort of a Norwegian property developer, they went into the Swedish Women League. The price is so much lower, learned a lot, and has really gotten a great return on investment. But I think they and others are really thinking also about how can we bring in more proponents. And in that sense, I think this is very similar dynamics as what we see with sustainability and COP 26, 27. You know, it's you want to be the first mover and come there, but you really rely on not the laggers, but those in the middle. And if they come quickly, I think women's football is just going to explode. And if it takes a long time, unfortunately, the dynamics is going to be slower than expected.
Right, and maybe a different types of engagement with fans as well, right? Maybe this isn't about large number of eyeballs, but maybe a deeper engagement around purpose, and something that women's sport offers.
Definitely around that, and you also see that with the proponents in US, female women's soccer and everything. They have been great at picking up and embedding their sport in society level issues, and I think that's something you need to do.
And I think an important aspect is here, why shouldn't female football be different from? So I had this discussion a number of times. So okay, you have male football and you have female football, but it doesn't need to be the same event or the same experience that you do. And I think they so female football could be more encouraged also to tap into new grounds and go their own way instead of kind of copying what we know from male football. I think that would be another webinar, huh?
There is definitely, I'll pick. Thank you so much for all the questions. This we need to do more time. I just pick a final one around what can business leaders learn from sports. And here my favorite example is the Norwegian Oil Fund. So the Norwegian Oil Fund is the biggest investor in the world. They have 1,200 billions under capital. So they own 1.5% of all companies in the world. What they have done to train their investment managers to really, take the right risks is to hire the best sports psychologist from the Norwegian Olympic Committee. So in the same way, for those of you who've seen the TV series Billion, they have a new Wendy, you could say, and I think that is the new thing. And that's something that we are monitoring very carefully and really looking into, because I think, especially on the team level and on the individual level, I think both public and private and non-for-profit organizations can learn a lot from the sports world. So there's a lot to learn there. I think now, Caroline, is the time to talk a little bit about the next step, right?
Good.
And what have we envisioned there?
Right, I thought Sasha was going to talk about that, but I'll be very glad to.
Yeah, so first of all, we wanted to just explore how it goes today, and see if there is an interest from our alumni community in kind of continuing, but given the number of people also still in the session, we should give it another try and kind of make one full round of webinars. So I would be next, end of January, beginning of February, and would like to talk about my favorite topic is like how new technologies are impacting the future of sports in terms of athletes, consumers, and management. And so we would basically do the same thing, have a little intro round. We don't need to introduce ourselves, but have a little warm up, then a keynote, and then a Q&A. And yeah, then Caroline, I think you can give a kind of a
Yeah, that's
glimpse
right.
of.
Yeah, I'll round off our trilogy of webinars. Wonderful. In sometime around March, around responsible development of sports talent, something we actively work on with our partners. It includes dual careers for athletes, but also goes beyond that, and also looks at lessons that we can learn from sports about careers more generally as they're becoming more dynamic, and many of us can expect our careers to change more frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and given that this is a kind of a new thing we are doing, please really feel free to advise, to give comments, feedback. So we can also kind of adjust the format. So it should be really be time well spent. And so we really appreciate the time you spent already, but also any type of feedback or comments that you have.
And I, as a final point from my side, I think today has shown hopefully a little bit that this idea of taking 3 great business schools that has a lot in common, and talking about the topic that we love, but that has, you know, appeal to broader sectors in society, that I think is the key thing. So you sort of get 2 for the price of 1. We talk about sports, but you learn about other things as well. Maybe 3 for the price of 1, because hopefully over time we will network and build stronger bonds between the 3 universities here in Sweden and Germany and in France.
Great.
Wonderful. And we're at time. I've allowed myself to promote our LinkedIn page in the chat. But yeah, thank you, Martin, once more so much for his interesting keynote.
And we will send out all the slides, of course, so you can share. And please, you know, contact us, reach out, and have ideas, because as with La Liga, it's the ecosystem that needs to get going here. So thank you so much for taking the time tonight.